Welcome to episode 3 of The Art of Bird Photography. In The Art of Bird Photography, I talk about things like composition, lighting, and other stuff that accompanies bird photography. I'm mainly going to be talking about the artistic side of photography rather than the technical side, so I'm not going to be teaching the details of how to do editing, but I'm just going to talk about the motivation behind some of my editing choices. And today, for this episode, we have the Sooty Tyrannulet. The Sooty Tyrannulet is a bird that is completely in South America, and it has its stronghold in Uruguay and Brazil. And we have a photo I took near the water. In fact, this bird is almost always found within the water. And the theme of this episode today is controlling the background. Usually when we take pictures of birds, we tend to think of the subject, bird itself, but the background or the surroundings are just as important. So I'm talking about controlling the background, controlling the surroundings here. So in this photo, I can already see a ton of things that need to be improved. It's already looking pretty good. I've done the basic exposure, tone adjustments, some color, but I want to make some modifications to make this photo just a little bit better. And I'll start with the tone adjustments. I see an out of focus rock in the background, this rock right here in the top left-hand corner. It seems a little flat to me. It doesn't have that nice three-dimensionality, and the border between this dark area that's behind the bird and the brighter rock area seems rather flat. So I'm going to apply a little bit of a tone curve. You can see my tone curve that I'm applying very gentle, and it's going to slightly bring out the three-dimensionality. This is off, this is on. It brings out the slight three-dimensionality, and I like it a lot better. It has that nice hint of what's in the background rather than just a flat texture. So that's the first thing I did. I kind of like that little bit more texture in the background. Second thing I noticed is that the bottom of the photo is a little bit bright. You see, when you're looking around at a bird photo, look at it and see which areas catch your eye. And if the areas that are catching your eye are not the areas that you want the eye to go to, it might be a good idea to darken them a little bit. So I have applied another tone curve to the bottom of the photo using a mask to darken it a little bit. There we go. Now it's a little bit more dark. You can see my mask. It's a gradient mask, and it just darkens that part of the rock so that it's not so prominent and gives a little bit more attention to the bird. We've also got quite a lot of lightness in the rock right here. And you can see some very bright specks. I think that takes away a little bit from the photo. So I applied another tone curve here, and it just darkens them a little bit. See, on, off, on. And you can see I just applied a slight mask there to darken that area too. I'm not going to darken all the specular highlights. I like the water splashes on the rock here. I like the specks of water here. But I wasn't so much a fan of the bright sunlight reflecting off the rock on the right of the bird. Also, another small thing, which has nothing to do with the background, but I'm just going to mention it now because it's in the tone curve adjustments, is the eye to me looks a little gray. Now, I don't demand too much pure black in my photo or things that are close to pure black, but the eye should be, the darkness of the eye, I like it when it's fairly close to pure black. So I am going to turn on a little bit of a tone curve. You probably can't even notice that, but it just makes the eye just a little bit blacker. See, I applied a little mask to the eye to make it a little bit blacker. There's also something else. On the top right-hand side of the photo, there are these two sort of black areas. They look like black squares or rectangles or something. I don't like those too much. I think they're a little bit too dark for the rest of the photo, so I did lighten them a little bit. And you can still see them now, but this is one of the things I'm going to be considering when I'm printing this photo. If I'm printing this photo and I add a white border around that photo, suddenly the whiteness of the black borders kind of somehow de-emphasizes that black in a way. So if I'm printing this photo, I'm going to also choose a frame color that kind of de-emphasizes that black area. But anyways, in editing, I just add a little bit of gray to those black squares so they're not so prominent. Also, there's a little bit of bright green stuff under the tail of the bird. You can see right here under the tail of the bird, a little bit of bright green. And now, obviously, I'm not trying to de-emphasize every bright area of the photo. That's not the goal. The goal is to kind of make the bird stand out here. So, for example, these green areas that are on the rock a little further away from the bird, I'm not going to bother with those. I like that kind of bright contrast. It adds some environmental interest. But the bright spot just under the tail, I decided to darken just a little bit because that kind of catches my eye a little bit too much. So because it's so close to the bird, I like to darken certain very bright things very close to the bird. now that did a lot of improvements. We added a lot of local tone curve adjustments to make the picture a little more balanced and add a little bit of interest to the photo by adding a little more texture to some areas. So there are two final things I want to talk about here. First, we've got the bokeh. Let's talk about the bokeh here, okay? Now, the bokeh is obviously looking a little strange, and the reason why it does is because I am using the Nikon 500mm f5.6 PF lens with a phase Fresnel element, so it does tend to add a little bit of unusual texture to the bokeh, but even without a PF lens actually, you might still get some strange texture in your bokeh. So what I did actually was I used the lens blur module, and I applied the lens blur module straight to the bokeh to get rid of those weird textured elements. And you can see my mask. I pretty much drew over the bokeh spots that had very strange textures in them, and I applied the background blur a little bit. And that kind of gets rid of those very rough elements and takes away a lot of that weird roughness texture that shouldn't be there anyway. One final thing I want to talk about is that the very small thing. See the top left-hand corner of this photo, I don't mind it too much. It looks nice, but there's a little bit too much texture in it for me, so I did apply the soften module here. Just softens that top left corner a little bit. Not too much. I can also make it a little bit darker if I want. And as you can see, I'm applying this module with only a 55% opacity, so it doesn't really do too much. It just takes a slight amount of visual weight away from that top left-hand corner. I'm all about very subtle, minute adjustments that take a little bit away from the visual weight of the elements of the photo so that the photo pretty much reflects accurately the scene that I saw it, but kind of is more consistent with how the eye tends to go towards certain objects. The camera has a tendency to overemphasize certain areas that your eye would not go to in real life, so that's kind of my guideline for editing, not to make the photo look radically different than the way it was before. Those are all the improvements I did. They're not major, but I am going to export a before and after shot so you can see how these small changes change the look of this photo. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you again next time. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Good luck with your bird photography.